Lovers and friends, welcome back to the ProdCast. You have no idea how long I've waited to say that. Welcome to Season 2. Thank you for coming back for more. For more prodding, more interviews, hopefully more funny shenanigans with me and Brandon, my co-host, who unfortunately is not here today. We weren't originally going to do it like this, but we recorded some of these episodes shelter at home because of the coronavirus, and because we want to provide you guys with some content while you're at home, practicing safety with your family, staying away from those who are elderly or immunocompromised. Please do that. We want to provide you with some content. So hopefully this is a way for us to do that. There was a funny book. It's not a funny book, but there was a book that was written. It's a funny title. I always thought it was a funny title. Called Love in the Time of Cholera, and it was written by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And this is podcasting in the time of COVID-19. Craziness. But we hope you're being safe, and we hope you're practicing safety. We also hope you are being kind to one another. I know one sponsor, our newest sponsor, that I want to bring up today, who is practicing kindness and showing their appreciation for those who are on the front lines in the medical field and first responders, police, fire, etc. And they are showing love back to these folks. And now, through April 26th, if you go to Coates Car Care, Austintown, Howland, Niles, and Cortland, Ohio, and you're a first responder or you're in the medical profession and you show your ID through the window, because we're practicing social distancing, you show your ID through the window, your car wash is free. That's the kind of business that they run. This is the kind of family-owned operation that wants to, first off, they shut down. They just reopened under modified guidelines once they got clearance from the health departments. They were the only car wash to do that. They shut down because they wanted to protect their team members and they wanted to protect you, the customer. And they've reopened automatic washes only. There's no interiors. There'll be no full service washes yet until we get the all clear. But that's the kind of family run business that they have. And I can't say enough about Coates Car Care. I can't say enough about their family. They sponsor a lot of, organizations, and they definitely are a business and a family that gives back to their local community. And so I want to thank them for sponsoring us for the next 26 episodes. Huge thank you, huge support. And I'm honored because they've been in business for over a half century. They also use exclusively Simonize products for their top quality care in every location. Now, if you don't know anything about Simonize is the top car wash product, automatic car wash product in the U.S., and they're made in the USA. So that's kind of cool, too. Not only their family business, but they're using made in the USA products on your cars, which, who's not for supporting the US of A, right? Especially in these times. So your car's dirty, get out there and get your car washed. And they even they take it one step further. They actually have a unlimited wash program that lets you clean your car once a day. It lets you do it for less than $1 a day. Okay. And then the packages go up. You can add waxes and different, underbody coatings, et cetera, But their intro program, the unlimited wash program, lets you clean your car once a day for less than $1 a day. You can sign up in any of their stores, or you can see more at coatescarcare.com or visit theprodcast.net, which is our website. You can find all different episodes if you want to listen to back episodes in season 1. Or if you go to that page, on the left-hand side at the top of the page, you'll see the show sponsors, and you can click on the Coates Car Care logo, and it goes right to their page. Shout out to them. Thank you very much. And let's get on with season 2 right now. Let's get electrified. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited today to have not only one of the premier actors in the world who has graced stage and screen, Tony nominated, and is one of, which we'll talk about as we get into it, but is one of the foremost sought after acting instructors in the country. And so today I got to spend some time with him in a workshop, totally out of my comfort zone, doing some acting and learning a tremendous amount. And that's what this episode will be about today. So hopefully you'll glean some amazing tidbits of information from my friend, actor extraordinaire, Mr. Austin Pendelton. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jill. I love coming. I was real excited when I knew we were going to have some time together. Yeah.
Well, so we almost did this back in November of 2019, or I'm sorry, October of 2019.
Yeah.
And I was moving into a new house at that time.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we weren't able to make it happen. But Austin had come to town this weekend to do an acting workshop at the Trumbull New Theater on 422. Mm-hmm. Great facility. And this, you actually did too. I attended the second one.
Yeah.
So I don't even know how you're standing, really. I mean, you're sitting, obviously.
I'm sitting. That's how I'm standing. Yeah.
But you still have the energy to keep it going, man. I'm super impressed.
Well, I was looking forward to this.
Me too.
Yeah.
So tell me, and I know a little bit of the story, but tell our listeners, how did you get into acting?
I knew from very young that I wanted it for about 3 reasons. One was Trumbull New Theater began in our living room. We lived out in Leavittsburg. And after World War II, a year or two after World War II was over, by the way, my 2 earliest childhood recollections are about halfway through World War II. I was 3, and I woke in our house in Leavittsburg at 3 in the morning or something, and went past through the screen porch at the back and up to my parents' to their bedroom, and I woke them up and said, Hitler is on the back porch. I'd had a dream that Hitler was on the back porch.
Oh, jeez.
And I didn't even know who Hitler was. I knew that when his name was spoken, it was not with a great deal of affection, you know. And they said, oh, I don't think so. No, you've got to come talk to him. He's on the back porch. I was finally dissuaded from this. So that's my first recollection. Then my second is the night of VE Day. In 1945, May, I guess, of 1945.
In year 3 or 4 this time?
By now I'm 5.
Okay.
I was born in 1940.
Okay.
And so we got in the Mercury, the old Mercury we had, which is a few years old, and we drove down to Courthouse Square. And as we approached Courthouse Square, all these cars were driving in, and everybody was honking their horns. And the relief and the feeling that the war was over, which isn't a thing that's really happened since. There's never been a war that's been suddenly definitively over.
Right.
And everybody was so happy and relieved, and some were full of grief, but still happy and relieved. And it was so emotional, and it was community-wide. And it's like, felt like the whole community had all driven out or walked out in their cars at like 7 o'clock in the evening on a spring night. And I remember those horns honking. So now a couple years after that, some people approached my mother, who had been a professional actress and director. In fact, my dad first saw her on the stage at the Cleveland Playhouse.
Oh, wow.
He was being introduced to her by a couple of mutual friends, and the first thing they did was take him to see this play, and then they went out afterwards, and then they dated a while, and then they stopped. They drifted apart, I think. This is 1936 or 7. He was in Sardi's one night, the theater restaurant. At that time, the theater restaurant, the only one. And after a show, and she was a young actress living in New York and seeking her career. And at those times, young actresses lived in these 2 or 3 story little townhouses, and they were supervised, and a gentleman could never come up to their room. and was they would entertain their gentlemen within strict hours on the ground floor. But my dad ran into her at Sardi's. And all during the 30s, when she'd lived in New York, she would go to parties at the apartment on Riverside Drive of the Gershwin family. The Gershwin just have these open house parties. You know, George Gershwin, Ira Gershwin, their parents. And she went to a lot of those parties. One of the people who used to sing at those parties spoke at my mom's memorial in Cleveland in 2003. And so she had this whole life going in New York as a young actress and some success. She got booked in the tour of the Lillian Hillman play, The Children's Hour, but that play then was banned in half the cities the tour was going to because it had a lesbian theme. And so they canceled the tour. It was around that time my father ran into her at Sardi's, and they picked up their acquaintance again, but it started in Cleveland at the Cleveland Playhouse. So anyway, because of her background, and she gave all that up and married my father and settled in Warren. They married in 1938, so very shortly before World War II. Then he didn't go to World War II because he owned the Warren Tool Company, which he had bought for $1 on the steps of the courthouse in the early part of the Depression, and he was slowly building it into a good little company, prosperous. So, but he stayed because the government had him making anti-tank shells for the war.
Oh, okay.
So I grew up in World War II in a stable household, which was very unusual at the time. And my brother was born a year and a half after I was, to the day, a year and a half. And then our sister was born just after VE Day and just before Hiroshima. So we were on every aspect of the war. My brother was born just a little bit before Pearl Harbor. So then after the war, some people came to my mom because they knew of her professional background in theater, and they were going to start a community theater, the Trumbull New Theater, TNT, in other words.
Dynamite.
Yeah, right, exactly. And they asked her for advice. Well, they got a lot more advice. She helped them raise money, and then she contributed artistically to that theater for over 40 years before she, after our dad died in 1985, she moved to Boston in 1990. And I think the last work she did at TNT was in 1988, and the theater started about 1947 or 48, something. And the first rehearsals were done in the evening in our living room after dinner. And the people in the group were people who worked in the mills. Warren was then a very prosperous town with a lot of factories. In fact, at night, the sky looked like from Gone with the Wind. The sky was red from all the blast furnaces, yeah.
Wow.
Which wasn't healthy, but it was thrilling to look at. And so it was a prosperous town post-war. And so almost all the people, the actors were young actors and some older people who were either receptionists or they were or they worked in the mills or they were lawyers or in this prosperous community. And they were very excited about doing theater. So after dinner, we would arrange the furniture in the living room for whatever the ground plan of the play they were rehearsing was. I think they rehearsed maybe 2 or 3 plays in there. And I was so transfixed by that. And I was supposed to be in bed, and Alec was supposed to be, and Margaret was in bed because she was only 2 or something. And we would sneak down and hide and watch the rehearsals. And the way the whole, just during the daytime, before the rehearsals, which were always in the evening, the energy in the house would change, knowing that they were coming. And I thought, well, this is the life for me. It changes everything. Also, when I was around 7 years old, I began to stutter. And it got, well, and about 4 or 5 years later, it got quite severe. I finally went for a treatment of it in early 81. there was a guy who started a program for it in Hollins, Virginia called Ron Webster. And I read about it in People magazine. I made an appointment, but then I couldn't go to Virginia, so they just opened a branch in New York, and it was very 3-week intensive. I'd already done a lot of work on it just by 20 years of being an actor. Part of the reason I went into acting was that I would be free from it, usually,
Sure.
when I acted. So I was driven. I still equate acting with saving my life.
Wow.
That was another reason that I was so drawn when these people came to the living room at night to rehearse, because I imagined a life of doing that and therefore being able to talk. And plus I just loved the form. I loved the play. The first play they did, these people from a mill town in Ohio in the late 1940s, was a Noel Coward play, Hay Fever, which I remember they carried off with great aplomb. So they threw their net very wide. And then my mother directed a philosophical play from the 1930s in our living room called Hotel Universe by Philip Perry, who wrote the Philadelphia Story. Very uncharacteristic play by Philip Perry that she loved. And the community was quite fascinated by it. And these two plays were performed in our living room. We would hang up a curtain in the middle of the living room, put folding chairs on one side of it and the playing area on the other. I was just enthralled with all this. Then the final part of the triptych was, in those days, every year there was a new touring company of Oklahoma. And we would go up to Cleveland to see it. It was always at night for some reason, even we were quite young. And I remember driving along 422 coming back from Cleveland at 11:30 or something at night, looking at the fields and thinking, I want to be in Oklahoma.
How old were you at that point?
By this point this was actually before TNT. It was 5 or 6.
Wow.
They did annual tours of Oklahoma. And it feels to me like we went to all of them. And it was so wonderful. And everybody on the stage was so energized. And the music was so exciting. And so between Oklahoma, the forming of TNT, rehearsing in our living room, and wanting to escape from my speaking problem, it all just, and from the crystallization of those 3 things, I never wavered, because it all got tied in with survival.
Yeah.
And that tends to stick, you know. And then what I found out in the branch in New York of the Ron Webster program about studying, he was a speech and voice teacher, and he went down to Hollins, and a couple of the young women there, it's school for young women then and may still be, a couple of them had that problem, so he just began to research it. Up until then, he had he wasn't thinking about that. He was teaching speech and voice. So he did endless amounts of research. The percentages are the same in every culture in the world. 3/4 of people who stutter are men. Of kids, a lot of kids stutter. And then when they turn 12, it either completely goes away, clearly a hormonal, completely goes away, or it gets much worse. And that's a small percentage, maybe 1/5 of the kids who had stuttered. So I was one of the 5th where it got much worse. But still, when I acted in school plays, or me and my friends formed a kind of a junior TNT in the basement of our house on Atlantic Street. We'd moved to Atlantic Street by this point. And in fact, the house was even designed so the basement room would accommodate our theater. And we did plays, and I just found, every once in a while there was an exception to this, that I didn't stutter when I was acting. So that in addition, that just reinforced that feeling when the stuttering became much worse in my high school years. And there were occasional kinds of lapses from that, but in general, particularly if the scene was really energized, I would be fine. And it was a glorious feeling. So I acted all through college. I went to Yale as an undergraduate. I didn't go to the drama school. And then I went right into New York after I graduated and got in a play a very successful off-Broadway play directed by Jerome Robbins. Oh, Dad, Poor Dad, Mama's hung you in the closet and I'm feeling so sad. It was sort of a comedy with, as you can tell, an edible theme. The character, however, stuttered. I didn't stutter in the audition. I just wouldn't. But Jerry Robbins heard in my voice the rhythms and the placement of a person. He was very intuitive. He was, he created West Side Story.
Okay. Wow.
He was the great musical theater director. And Gypsy, he would direct it originally. And he'd worked on a lot of it. He did the ballet sequence in The King and I. And he had and he was also a choreographer that he created a number of remarkable ballets. And so the Odad was his first play. And so I was new in New York. And I thought, well, I could get that part if I auditioned for it. Then by a fluke, I got a chance to audition for it. They had run out. He auditioned everybody in town, including brilliant actors who have since had extraordinary careers. But they weren't what he was looking for. So a friend of mine had an agent who told her this. And my friend said, I have a friend who could play this. So I met the agent. She submitted me. The casting director said, well, what the hell, we might as well see him. We can't find. And I got the job. But I tried to get out of it almost as soon as it opened. It was a success because I thought the stuttering was getting out of control. When the character stuttered, I couldn't keep it within the boundaries of the play. So it got terrifying. So about 3 months into the run, I said to the stage manager, I got to quit. And it was an off-Broadway show. So in an off-Broadway show, you have a 2-week out. On Broadway, you have a longer. It's much harder to get out of a contract. So the next day, the stage manager called me and said, stop at Jerry's apartment on the way to the theater. So I did. And he said, so I hear you want to quit. He said, I can't stop you. You have a 2-week out, but I don't want you to quit. And I said, well, I don't think you realize how bad it gets some nights. He said, yeah, we have a thing in the professional theater called the performance report. I'd never heard of that. And I said, you mean you've read about this? He said, yeah. And you still want me to be in? Because your name is on the show, Jerry. And he said something, I wish I could remember the exact word. He said, I'm not frightened of losing my name. He was one of the major figures of the American theater. So, okay, all right. So, of course, after that, I soared, that boost of confidence. He said, and I quote, if you quit this, you probably won't act again. Word will get out, for one thing, and secondly, you'll be too scared. I want you, quote, I want you to act the rest of your life. We wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for that conversation.
Wow, yeah.
So then I began to soar, but then I got in trouble again, and I said to one of the other actors, a man by the name of Barry Primus, a friend of mine, I said, Barry, I don't know, I can't handle this. Jerry wants me to stay in, but I'm having all this trouble again with it now. After the elation, after the conversation, I'm slipping back into it. He said, I'll tell you exactly what to do. I said, what? And he gave me subway directions to HB Studio, where I now teach.
Yeah.
To go audition to study with Uta Hagen.
Yeah, we talked about her today at the...
Yeah. So I knew of her, of course. I had a friend in college who had studied with her, and he told me all about her and everything. And my mom would always talk a lot about Uta Hagen. So I went down and auditioned when I got in the class. Then that began to really help because basically she teaches you to use whatever your troubles are, incorporate whatever your fears are, and just not try to rise above them, but to incorporate them into the work. So that began to make it easier. I still had a lot of bad nights, but some of the bad nights were very actually elevated by it, and some weren't elevated by her techniques that I was learning. Finally, after about a year, it got way out of hand, and I was fired, and it was the happiest night of my life when I was fired. So I left 2 weeks after I was fired, and that was a real happy night. Meanwhile, I'd worked with two of the greatest actresses for a year in New York, Jo Van Fleet and Barbara Harris. It was a career beginner for Barbara Harris. she got such acclaim in it. And she was wonderful. And Jo Van Fleet was a great actress, a famously difficult woman. But she and I got to be friends. Our cast was the only cast that ever made friends with her. I don't know. It was something happened to that show. Maybe because of all the turmoil in me, but in general, there was turmoil going on. And we all we bonded, you know. And so I thought, when I was fired, I thought, well, I'm so glad to be out of this. Meanwhile, I'm getting more and more training. So just in acting, and I've begun singing lessons, which helps you with a problem like that. And a lot of lessons in voice, but not particularly directed at this problem, but still placement and breathing, all of which was helping. And I would do scenes in class where I wouldn't have a problem. So I was thinking, I'm just going to slowly work my way out of this. But I don't have to go to that play every night and try to control it. Because the play invites you to stutter, and then you have to control it. It was very, very painful. Then, quite a few months after I was through with it, I got a call that Jerry Robbins wanted to audition me for a musical by the name of Tevye, which has come to be known as Fiddler on the Roof. And I came in and I auditioned for the part of the revolutionary Perchik. And I was thrilled. He wanted me to read for it. It was like the opposite of the part in Odad. And he came up onto the backstage after I'd auditioned from the stage. He said, "You're over the stutter. That's an amazing accomplishment." I said, "Well, I've been working on it." And then he, after about he always auditioned people endlessly, till finally there's an equity rule, actors union, actors equity rule, known as the Jerry Robbins rule, meaning you can't audition people any more than 3 times without beginning to pay them for each audition. That's the Jerry Robbins rule. Because he couldn't make up his mind about anything. He was so brilliant, and he couldn't make up his mind, which was fascinating to me. And he questioned every decision he ever made. On the 6th day I read for Perchik, the 6th time I read for Perchik, he said, "While you're here, will you read the role of the tailor?" And I thought, well, that's stupid. Well, I don't want it. But I read it, and the next day I got that part.
Wow.
And then he rewrote the part. So I still had a little trouble with the speech in that, but by now I knew how to fully fold it into the character. And I was in that for a year, and then came out here. And then when my contract was up, I came out here and directed my mother at TNT in The Glass Menagerie.
How was that, directing your mom? Was it, were you nervous about that? Because
I wasn't nervous. It was turbulent.
Yeah.
And I mean, she was not without opinion, you know. And but, you know, those wonderful evening rehearsals at TNT, and it was great. And then I went back to New York, and I was out of work for a while, and then I began to get other work.
What year is this? This is in the 70s?
No, when I left Fiddler in August of 1965. I'd been in it just about a year. And I left the same night that Zero Mostel left. It was when our contracts were up. And Britt Convy, we all left the same night. And other people renewed their contracts. And I would have if I hadn't been going to Ohio to direct my mother. Hal Prince was the producer, and he offered me, he said, "Are you going to renew?" And I said, "Well, I've been asked to go direct my mother after my contract is up in Ohio in the community theater." He said, "Okay, I'm not going to be the man who kept that from happening." So he offered me a deal that I could take 3 months off, and my understudy, who was Leonard Fry, would play those 3 months. And Leonard went on to play the role in the movie and got an Oscar nomination for it.
Oh, wow.
He was a brilliant actor, and he was an incredibly supportive understudy. And so that all worked very well for him. But I decided not to take Hal's offer up to re-enter the show after I got back. First of all, I was addicted to Zero Mostel. So it was virtually a chemical addiction. And secondly, I thought I'd been in it a year, and let me just seek my fortune. So for quite a few months when I came out back from the Glass Menagerie, I was out of work, and I started to get anxious. But I had a director friend who said to me, treasure this time. You'll work again. Don't look back at this time and say, I wasted this whole time just worrying.
What did you do during that time?
Auditioned for things unsuccessfully, hung out with people, did a little writing. I remember, after that guy said, it's one of the most wonderful pieces of advice I ever had. I just said, okay. Meanwhile, I'm taking acting classes and voice classes and singing lessons. And because I'd sung in Fiddler, but now I was building on that. And hanging out with friends. And I had it for several months, and I just started really enjoying it all. I treasure that time. And then finally work began to start coming again.
Well, there's an amazing dichotomy in your upbringing. Your father being in manufacturing
Yes.
and very successful.
Yes.
And your mother, an actress, also very successful. Were you ever torn between the two? Or
No.
No. It was always acting.
Totally. And Alec went into manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Between us, we covered the waterfront.
Well, even that time when you were in New York and you weren't working, did you ever think like, oh,
No.
wow, no B plan?
I never have had a B plan.
I love that. I
don't know what I would have done had I been totally challenged, where just suddenly, I know actors who have good careers going, and suddenly it all dries up. This business is so...
Fickle?
Yeah, capricious.
Mm-hmm.
And, but then, over a decade after that, in 1978, and I was going along fine. I would get hired by different theaters. I did a couple of more Broadway shows, but they didn't run anything like Fiddler on the Roof. But they were Broadway shows, but I did off-Broadway shows and some non-for-profit theater shows and stuff. And generally they went well, and even if they didn't go well, they didn't go disastrously for me or anything like that. And then in 1977, an English director, Frank Dunlop, started a company at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and I was in one play. The seasons were in the spring. In his first season, 1977, in the Chekhov play Three Sisters, and that went very well. And he got so excited about that. He said, next season I'm going to stretch you in all kinds of ambitious ways. And he did. And I don't regret it for a minute, but I got terrible reviews for those. And he stood by me, and but his company folded, not because of me entirely. It just folded for a lot of reasons. But what that did, those three sets of significantly terrible reviews, suddenly my work stopped, and nobody wanted me. And I knew some casting directors, and I called them up and I said, I can't get an audition for this play. And I know you're casting it. Could you get me an audition? And they would do a tap dance on the phone. I would say, no, look, I know. Nobody wants to see me. And, but could you? And they would say, yeah, okay, I'll get you a slot. But then I'd get there, and the director would be openly unhappy to see me. And so it looked like that was just all going to dry up. And so I discovered, like, the showcase code.
What does that mean?
That means these little shows that go on. In those days, you didn't get paid at all for them, not even subway fare. And they would rehearse, and then they would pay, I think the limit Actors Equity was allowed was 16 performances. The chronology of this isn't exact, but I sort of became aware that there was that possibility, so I could keep acting. And meanwhile, I was teaching. I'd begun to teach at HP where I studied with Uta and her husband Herbert, who founded the place. And Herbert, in 1969, had asked me to start to teach there. So I've been, this just recently was the 50th anniversary of that. And that was in all ways stabilizing. It was an income. It wasn't a huge income, but it was an income and a steady one. And it's not like Herbert kicked me out because I got bad reviews. He carried on. And so that, and then by a fluke, I got involved with the Steppenwolf company in Chicago, which was in its, not infancy, that's exactly the wrong word, in its first great years. And so I directed a play in New York by Ralph Pape called Say Goodnight, Gracie, a 5-character play. And this producer named Wayne Adams, he kept it running off Broadway for, it added up to a year finally. And a young couple came in from Chicago to see a lot of theater, and they loved that play. So they went out and told a producer that they were on the board of his theater to come see it. And he came, saw it, and said, "Okay, I want the Chicago rights." This was the night before our daughter was born, Audrey. So Katina, my wife, and I went down where the theater was and went to a bar. And the New York producer, Wayne Adams, talked to the Chicago producer. And Wayne said to the Chicago producer, "You can have the Chicago rights, but Austin has to direct it." And I started kicking Wayne under the head. I've directed it already. Furthermore, we're about to have a baby. I don't want to do this, was what my kicking meant. But Wayne was unfazed. And the next night. And so the Chicago producer said at the bar there, "Well, all right. He clearly had wanted a Chicago director. But he said, okay, Austin can do it, but he has to use the members of this new company in Chicago called the Steppenwolf." So the next night, Audrey was born. And the night after that, after visiting hours, I went over to Wayne's. He'd come to see the baby. But I went over to his place, and I said, and he poured me red wine, cooked me a steak. And I said, "Wayne, I'm not going to Chicago. This is ridiculous. The guy wants somebody else anyway." He says, "You're going. I've kept this play open for months, which has not hurt you at all. I want to protect the property." I said, "But Wayne, furthermore, a young company that calls themselves the Steppenwolf, that's so pretentious. Either they're naming themselves after a very fine rock group. Why don't you and I open a theater called the Rolling Stones? I mean, that's so parasitical. Or, much worse, they're naming it after the Hermann Hesse novel, which was, at that time, I thought the most heavy-handed thing I had ever read in my life." That's my opinion. A lot of people I love and respect feel otherwise. Wayne said, "Say all you want, but you're going." So, very much against my will, I went out, and what a company of actors. I mean, there was a core original company. John Malkovich, Joan Allen. For one role, I had to pick between Joan Allen and Laurie Metcalf. I'd never heard of either one of them.
Wow.
But they auditioned, and I thought, Glenn Headley was there then. And she ultimately won a couple of awards for it. It turned into their first big hit. It transferred to another theater. It ran for months. And so I kept being invited back. And this was in my years of Eclipse in New York, and as an actor, and so I suddenly had a second home, and finally they started inviting me to act, and then they invited me into the ensemble, and by this point the New York career was beginning to be restored after about 8 years of me being with Steppenwolf. But I had, and so the other good thing that happened during the years of Eclipse as an actor was I got asked to direct The Little Foxes starring Elizabeth Taylor, and that, of course, was a big hit. But the industry started to say, well, that doesn't tell any, that would be a big hit no matter who directed it, which is a little unfair. But still, that's not, I mean, we don't know if he's a major director. So it didn't do anything for my directing career, although it got 5 Tony nominations and all this, including one for a very gifted woman who had never acted in a play before.
Wow.
That being Elizabeth Taylor. But she took to it. But, I mean, you had to. And I got to know the author, who was Leon Hellman, and she was a terror. I loved her. I miss her so much. She was hell on wheels. She was very funny, and I really liked. We fought like cats and dogs, and I liked her a lot. So those were uplifts. But the most lasting of those things was me discovering that I could go anywhere to act. It didn't have to be in the mainstream. Act in New York, I mean, didn't have to be in the mainstream. That was a huge discovery. And the day the 3rd set of those awful reviews came out, I was meeting with Lynn Redgrave, who I had worked with before, about some project that we'd done in Chicago about bringing it to New York. It didn't come to New York. After the meeting, she said, before you got to Brooklyn, and the reviews were in that day, and they were so bad that my agent broke down, who was sort of a crusty, sweet lady, broke down in tears on the phone. And I hadn't read them, but I could tell. They were horrible, for me anyway. So Lynn Redgrave said to me, before you got to do the show in Brooklyn, let me buy you a cup of tea at the Russian tea room. And she said, you're going to have a rough few years. Her father was the great English actor, Sir Michael Redgrave. She said, my father went through some of these reviews in the 50s, and it was very, very hard on him. And John, by whom she meant John Gielgud, the same, and Ralph, meaning Ralph Richardson. These are 3 of the greatest actors of the 20th century. They went through reviews like this, but it was always understood in London, if the actor had a reputation and a career going, they could get reviews like that, and they would still be on stage the next season in London, in whatever. New York isn't like, New York doesn't forgive reviews like this. And so I'm telling you this just to be prepared for it. I felt so light after that. I thought, okay, she's laid it out for me. And indeed, she was on her timetable. My next kind of mainstream acting job in New York was 7 years later. She had said it would be 6 or 7 years. It sort of saved my whole head. So she was implicitly saying, look for other places to act. Just don't buy into her implication was don't buy into what's going to be a massive rejection of you. So she told me the dimensions of the problem and a way of dealing with it, which was simply not to deal with it. Don't go into career hysteria.
Well, I think
that was huge.
I think it was interesting. We talked earlier today, and you mentioned about the Iceman Cometh.
Oh yeah, that was
how you played Parrot.
Yeah, that was a few years before that, but that was in New Haven. That didn't destroy my New York.
Transcend in New York.
Yeah, it didn't. They heard vague rumors of, and also the one review I got for that was good was in the New York Times.
Yeah,
so that helped a lot.
But I thought it was interesting that you said in retrospect, looking back on it,
yes,
I shouldn't have read the things before.
Yeah.
I went, but talk about that, because I feel that that's really interesting for someone who's listening that's maybe a new actor or new, that is someone that, because we were talking earlier about, in this workshop, about finding what the, what you want out of the person opposite you.
Yeah,
you're playing opposite of you.
Yeah, what I want, what my character wants from that character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you equated it to, you had this thing with the character of Parrot in Iceman Cometh, who was born out of a relationship between these two people, and he realized that Larry, the father, was possibly his father, and he had to tell him, you're my father, and I'm the one that turned my mother in
To the police, yeah.
and you were looking for permission from him to kill yourself.
That's right.
And it wasn't working, right?
The performance wasn't working.
And they wrote these awful reviews.
Unspeakable reviews. But they were kind of isolated. They were in New Haven, and they were isolated in time. The ones in Brooklyn 6 years later were all in New York, and they were one right after the other. So
I see.
The career impact, the emotional impact was equally bad, but the career impact was much harsher in New York in 1978.
But it's so interesting that you found, I think the initial, what you wanted from that character was some sort of acceptance.
Yes.
And then you broke it down to the most basic thing. I just want to get him to smile.
That's right.
And that changed the performance.
Yeah. I read this terrible review backstage, which was idiotic of me. I was so desperate for a good review in that play. The one of the times was pleasant, but everything else was so bad. Every night they would post a review. I would read it thinking, this is going to be a good one, and they kept getting worse and worse. It was neurotic behavior on my part. And so, and it said, as I told today, it said, it's amazing how one really bad performance can undermine the work of many other good performances in the same production. So I'm staying there backstage thinking, I shouldn't even go on stage. And it was coming up to my entrance, and I thought, maybe I put my objective wrong to myself. Clearly, something's wrong. Because all the other reviews except the Times had been like that. That was the most direct statement of it. But so just before I went on, I thought, I've got to reframe the objective. Maybe winning his affection is too abstract a concept. Maybe I just want to see him smile at me. And then that introduced a whole new thing into my teaching, because that did work that night. And then I was able to keep that for the rest of the run, which was about another month. And it is a very challenging play, Iceman Cometh, and Eugene O'Neill. And so that was a moment of real epiphany. But you get these epiphanies when your back is against the wall. I've got to come up with something to go on stage with that won't be simply appallingly bad. And they're getting very close to the time I'm supposed to walk on. That kind of emergency.
Yeah, I think that that whole conversation today about kind of, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but embracing your fear, while you're there for the audience in a sense, and then they have this sense of electricity, for lack of better terms.
They have a sense, and this was an expression I heard from Uda in her class when she was teaching. She was criticizing a student very constructively and gently for his work. And he said, she says, you look confused. He said, I'm confused because I've never felt so relaxed in a role. And she said, and I quote, they don't come to see you relaxed, they come to see you in danger. Mm-hmm. Not uptight, but in danger, which means you're in a state of emergency and you're proceeding out of that. So you don't want to be confident when you go on stage. You want to be scared, and then you want to be able to convert that fear into very connected behavior that connects you to who the other character is on stage, or characters, And actually, the fear is your fuel.
Yeah.
Because plays are about people in danger, whether it's comically in danger or very seriously in danger. If the characters aren't in danger in a play, the play doesn't work.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant advice today. I took a lot of great notes. You'd said God invented stage fright so we can be on the same state as the character.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That was really brilliant. It's interesting, when you talk about the stutter too, and so more people consume. This is a general statement. I don't know if this is to be true or not, but I'm making a guess here.
Yeah.
More people consume because of the medium.
Yeah.
More people consume TV and film than theater, because you have to go out and see it, et cetera, and you can just watch some of the stuff in your. So, for the listeners out there, Austin and I met very graciously. He was so gracious to sit down and talk with me, and we were working on developing a project at the time, and we went to New York to shoot kind of a, I don't want to call it a sizzle reel, like a proof of concept of a scene.
Yeah.
And we went out afterwards. Now, Austin is known, so my age, I'm 44. My contemporaries, you people are like, oh, Austin Pendleton. They give you the look like, well, who is that? And I said, he's the stuttering lawyer in My Cousin Vinny.
That's right.
And they're like, oh my God, that's the best. He's like the best in the whole show. And then you were working on Wall Street 2.
That's right.
With Oliver Stone. And
that's right.
After we shot the scene, a group of us went to New York, and we met up with Austin, and we did rehearsal, which I was talking with one of the guys at the theater tonight, and I said it was amazing because I sent him a 6-page script on a Wednesday that I then realized this is way too long and I'm saying too much, and I pared it down, and it was like maybe 4 pages, and I think I resent it to you on a Thursday. We arrived in New York on a Friday and shot the scene on a Saturday, and you knew every fucking line. I mean, not one. It was we were looking at each other, myself and my friends, and we were like, how does this guy know all these lines in like 48 hours? It was incredible. But when it was done, my friend Joe Vigorito, who was working at that time at a restaurant in the West Village called L'Artusi.
That's right.
Yeah, a guy, August Cardona.
On Christopher Street or something like that.
Yeah. I don't know if that's it may be.
I can picture it. It was in some street like that in the village,
And he's actually back working there now again, and he's doing a phenomenal. But he hooked us up with the location, and so we went and we shot in an afternoon. And at the end of the shoot, we went back to our hotel rooms and said our goodbyes. And we went to. He had a party. He had a rooftop party. He lived in Hell's Kitchen, which is called Chelsea now, right? It was.
That's
Chelsea.
right.
And so we were there, and there's probably like 100 people there, and we're like these dudes from Ohio that just know Joe because Joe is from Warren, et cetera. And they're like, oh, there was a couple of girls, and they were like hanging around, and they're like, oh, you guys are you're friends with Joe. What are you guys doing here in New York? And we said, oh, we came to New York because we wanted to shoot this proof of concept scene with Austin Pendleton. And not knowing, this is, with all due respect, like, it's not a household name. If you're an actor, your name's a household name. Yeah, but totally. Like the people. And I said, oh, Austin Pendleton. And they were like, they stopped. They like almost gasped, like audible gasp. They were like, oh, Austin Pendleton? You worked with Austin Pendleton? I said, yeah, I thought they were pulling my fucking leg. I'm like, yeah. I said,
I still think they were pulling your
leg. No. They said, we have been waiting for months to get into his class. At
HB.
Yeah, and I was like, no shit. And they were like, oh my God. And then it was almost like we were like some kind of in that, at that party with these group of girls, like we were like the hot shit or something, you know. And of course I was dating my wife at the time, and so I had to like, okay, so that guy over there is single,
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
But yeah, it was kind of a cool experience because, Austin's from Warren. For the listeners that are out there, we're from the same hometown, and that was amazing to be in New York City. And of course, you've gone on to do, what's the TV program, like a repetitive role where you were like a serial killer or like a
Oz.
Yes,
in the prison.
Yeah, but in Oz. But then there was another show before that.
I was in Law and Order.
Law and Order. That's it. That's the one I'm thinking about. Did you do like 4 or 5 Law and Orders, or maybe?
No,
more?
I did one. I did a totally different role in each of the 2 sub Law and Orders.
Oh, okay.
One on. What are they?
SVU, yeah.
And the other one on criminal intent.
Okay.
But they were 2 very different roles.
Okay.
In the SVU one, I played a guy in the opening scene, I'm walking along a subway platform. It was filmed at the middle of the night on a PATH subway platform in New Jersey. And I'm walking along confidently, and a woman passes me and slices off my penis.
Jesus.
And of course, I'm upset.
Yeah, you think?
And it's the opening scene. I guess the audience is supposed to feel sympathy for this guy. You can't even walk down. And she cuts it through the cloth, and it apparently falls off. And then you see me trying to crawl up at the down escalator and blood all over the place. But as the series goes on, you find out at the very least I had it coming.
Yeah, right.
My friends still have not let me live down that episode. And then that I had women, I would kidnap women and chain them in the basement and abuse them. And this woman was a friend of one of those or something, tracked me down. And so that was SVU. And then on Criminal Intent, I was a guy in a wheelchair, again, in a very sympathetic context, but then he was just a monster.
Yeah, he was a bad guy too.
Oh,
right?
real bad.
Yeah,
real bad.
Well, Larry Infant, one of the guys that came to New York with us to shoot that scene, I must have been watching that. It was on TV, USA or TNT, I'm not sure which. And he texted me, and he was like, "Hey, our buddy Austin's on the show. He's on."
Criminal Intent.
Criminal Intent.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Let me turn it on." And I had seen that episode before, and I go, "Yeah." I said, this. He says, "Boy, I feel bad for him," or something along those lines. And I said, "Well, keep watching."
Yeah, right.
And then he texts me later, and he goes, "Man, what a fucking sicko that guy was!" Right?
Totally. I either get cast as really good people or really horrible people. Right. Yeah, right.
I thought it interesting too today, talking about like the stage fright thing, and the message that I heard was kind of like embrace it. Like you just have to kind of own it, right?
Yeah, totally.
You have the stage fright and you own it.
First of all, if you successfully deny it, it really hurts your work. Mm-hmm. If you deny it and are able to deny it, it really I mean, Udo would put it. Say you're in a play and for some reason you don't want to go on stage. And certainly overpowering stage fright would be one of those. But there are other reasons too. I'd rather be outdoors, it's a beautiful day. Or, don't try to get above that feeling. Take wherever you are on stage with you that way, and I think this was her phrase, but it's certainly what the phrase meant. That way the play can find you. Mm-hmm. And it can scoop you up into the play. But if you go on in a state of denial about what you're feeling about being on stage, it can't find you. You're hiding. So now this presumes that you've done the work on the part, that you know the logical behavior to do in the role. But if your execution of that on a given performance is hiding your true feelings about going on stage, the play can't find you. And you just get a stiff, unconnected performance. But if you're just hanging out inside yourself with how scared you are or how indifferent you are, which can happen if you play a play for a long time, that's the deadliest of condition. If you walk that on stage within 2 beats, the play has found you and converted that into the energy of the play. But it can't convert something it can't find. Mm-hmm. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever have that same feeling? Because the mediums are different. The acting is the acting, but it's a different delivery and it's a different.
Well, you do a lot of takes. You do a lot of takes,
right?
And if something goes wrong, they just start all over, like you said a while ago.
Yeah. Do you feel that same nervousness or butterflies?
Oh God, yeah. What if I make them do 25 takes? I mean, it's like.
Have you ever done that?
Not me alone. No.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's been a group effort. Yes.
Well, it's funny because you were talking. I forget that Michael, I think it was his name today, and he had written on Sybil, and you were talking about
Peter Bogdanovich
in the. It wasn't the Last Picture Show. It was
What's Up, Doc?
What's Up, Doc?
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool because and it kind of harkened back to a project that I'd worked on a while ago. But it was sometimes you have a director who is so driven to have you do, whether it's a perfectionist or whatever it is, and you had said, get everyone working on a challenging problem together.
Yeah.
And that forges the cast together so that it kind of cuts down on the hierarchy of the cast.
Yes.
So if you have somebody that's like a kind of a star or kind of a whatever, everyone gets on the same level because the director, you know.
Well, yeah, and it did create a real ensemble out of us. And
Yes.
there was a bunch of eccentric personalities on that film. And he had us all, as I say, in the same boat. I mean, we had to talk as fast as an old Howard Hawks comedy, and try that sometime. I mean, and flawlessly, you know, so everybody was scared that they were going to be the one to blow the take. But also, that in terms of hierarchy, that cast was headed by Barbra Streisand. I think I've only done one other film with her, and that one she directed, The Mirror Has Two Faces. But anyway, there's something about her personality that, to me, isn't hierarchical. She's with whoever she's talking to. Mm-hmm. She's just there. And she's not aloof. You know, she's very involved in the work, but she's very partners you in the work.
Is there anybody that you've worked with that you could say, you know, definitively, or maybe not just one person, but a few people, you know, whatever the context is or the number is, those people are just genius, or they're so good that it, like, are there people that were so amazing to you to work with?
Russell Crowe.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, in A Beautiful Mind. Yeah.
And that, again, was shot under very difficult circumstances.
And that's Ron Howard?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he's marvelous, too.
Yeah.
Russell, really, I shot everything in a day. It had to be that way because I was at Steppenwolf. And I had to fly down. And we had a long day that began at 7 in the morning, went till midnight. And some of that was very difficult. It contained the worst written scene I hope I will ever be in a movie. And then it also contained the best written scene I had yet been in a movie. And the bad one was where I was from the Nobel Peace, and we were walking outside on the Princeton campus. I'd flown to Philadelphia from Chicago the night before, quite late. And it's a scene where I'm from the Nobel Prize. I'm going to give him a Nobel Prize as a mathematician. And I'm explaining to him all his mathematical accomplishment. That, of course, scene never took place in real life. Nobody had to explain to this man the award, the breakthroughs he had made, and the awards and everything. I mean,
this was more exposition for the audience.
Yeah, but you can get away with exposition if it's conceivable that the one person would say this to the other person. And so I was having a rough time with it. And Russell was in old man makeup, and it was a hot, muggy day, and we had to do the scene over and over because I kept flubbing it. And Ron Howard would come running over patiently, saying, you're not quite. I'd say, finally I said, Ron, why do we even have this scene? This is such a brilliant script. And in fact, it won the Oscar for Best Script. What is this scene doing in this movie? And he said, the Mathematical Society of America insisted we put it in. I said, well, okay, that's at least a reason. But it frankly sounds like that. I don't know what the behavior is in this scene. I don't know how to make this real. He'd say, just try to do it. Just try to do a smooth take, and we'll just stop, okay? So finally I managed, but it was exhausted. Then around 5 in the afternoon, we went into the dining hall where we were going to shoot the great crowning scene of the movie at the end of the movie.
This is where they lay the pens down?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they did Russell's close-up because he'd been working, as I had, but he'd been working for weeks this way, and he was exhausted. His close-up, and he was breathtaking, of course. All through this day, which was very stressful for me, he was humorous and supportive, and I was playing Uncle Vanya, the Chekhov play at Steppenwolf, and he said, I had an uncle in Australia who did Uncle Vanya, And every year he would describe his reviews to us. And every year his recollection of those reviews grew rosier and rosier. He would tell me things like that. He was very funny. And I was a wreck. And I was getting to the point where I didn't want to be there. And so, but then finally we went into the dining hall for the really beautifully written scene in the role. And they did a close-up on Russell at like 6 o'clock, and he was extraordinary. Then Ron, I think, because they had to let people go, spent the next 5 hours shooting the pens being put on the table.
Wow.
I mean, first they hung the camera way up above there, and you saw every pen being put down. That took hours. Then a close-up on everyone, every professor who came and put the pen down, which is a ritual that professors show their respect for each other. And for each pen being put down, a close-up on the guy putting the pen down, a close-up on Russell watching the pen being put down, a close-up on me watching the pen being put down. And there were quite a number of professors coming up. And so it just finally, it's almost 11 o'clock. And our first of the 3 scenes, which is a scene where we introduced ourselves to each other, had been shot at 7 a.m. And I was so tired during that, I had no sleep, that I kept calling him by my name. Well, I would say, no, you're, and he's that, It was like acting 101 was eluding me completely. So that, and then the outdoor scene, which is still, I can't watch. So finally at 11 o'clock in the dining hall scene, the really good scene, they brought the camera around for my close-up for the end of the day, the end of the night. And I thought, I can't do it. I'm too tired. This was a real mistake doing this role. Because now I'm going to do this so badly. They're going to have to get another actor and reshoot these scenes. And this is such a mistake. So they said to Russell, you can go back and we'll get somebody to read your lines off camera. And Russell was beyond exhaustion. And Russell said, I'm not going. I'm playing it off camera for Austin. And I said, no, you don't. Honestly.
Wow.
You don't have to do this. He said, and because that often happens. And they get an assistant to read it, and you play the scene.
Sure.
And, the other person's off camera looking at you. An assistant or somebody. And Russell insisted on it. I thought, well, that's nice. He'll just feed me the lines, and at least it's Russell and all that. He played the scene as fully as he had done at 6 o'clock.
Wow.
Tears, everything. Off camera. We got it in one take. It's my favorite work I've ever done in a movie. And it's entirely Russell Crowe. People said that's a wonderful performance. Yeah, it was. That performance belongs to Russell Crowe. So, and Barbara Streisand is great off camera. She plays as fully as if it's her close-up. So you get so much. Mm-hmm. You get the whole richness of what they're sending you. And you just allow yourself to be triggered by it into your behavior. You don't even have to push anything or think about anything. So those are the class act people.
That's a great story. I'm going to go back now.
Yeah.
I've probably seen that movie 4 times,
Yeah.
but I'm going to go back and watch it again.
I have no idea if it's as good as I think it is, because my feeling about it is so powered by sheer relief that it was not catastrophic. and also that it might possibly cause the audience to forget the outdoor scene, which, frankly, the greatest actor in the world could not have. They could have done a little better than I did, but they couldn't make that scene work. It just doesn't work. And I felt sorry for Ron being put in the position of having to direct it, because it's an invalid scene. It wouldn't happen. The audience doesn't need to hear any of this. All they need to know is he's a famous mathematician, troubled as he is in the movie with schizophrenia. That's all they need to know.
Right.
They don't need to know he did this breakthrough that nobody knows what anybody's talking about, except a handful of people in the world. And so I liked happily the scene in the dining hall comes after that in the movie. So that's the impression they're left with.
Ended on a high note.
Yes, ended on a high note.
how about directors? You mentioned Ron. We talked about Peter Bogdanovich in the workshop. And
Well, the thing Peter Bogdanovich was pushing us to in the film was exactly right. It was just very hard to do. Rapid fire conversation around a table, for example, one scene. The dialogue just going, and quite a few minutes long. And any flaw, we would have to do the whole scene over again from anybody.
Yeah, you'd say because he shot it in a wide.
Yeah, he shot it in a wide. And he didn't do any coverage, so there was nothing to go to if somebody else flubbed. And that wasn't Peter being difficult. That was to get that effect. That's what you had to ask people to do. And it was very, very hard. I think that's the hardest day I ever. I mean, what was really hard was the badly written scene in Beautiful Mind, but that's because it wasn't well written in an otherwise, I got to emphasize, extraordinary script.
Sure, yeah.
But in What's Up, Doc, that was a well written scene. So it's not the scene itself that was hard, but what you had to do the scene was hard. I mean, to talk really fast, say all the words perfect, slightly overlap everything, and have everything just flow along, knowing at any moment you could screw the whole thing up, or any one of your 7 or 8 colleagues could.
And then you're the one responsible.
Oh, God.
Back to one.
Yeah, right.
Oh, it's Pendleton again.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Oh.
That's the terror, yeah. But almost nobody made any mistakes in it. It just wouldn't. Little things would go wrong. Sometimes just in the shooting.
Well, what's on the horizon for you now? I mean, are there any projects that you have that seem to be percolating coming up?
Well, I'm going to be in a Broadway show.
Oh, fantastic.
I was in one a year ago, and that was the first one in 20-some years. And now all of a sudden I'm in another one. Both of those originated from me being in Steppenwolf. Choir Boy was the one last year, and that was written by Terrell McCraney, who's a playwright who's part of the Steppenwolf ensemble. And so he wrote a part for me in it. Now this new one is by Tracy Letts, who wrote August Osage County, and he's a member of Steppenwolf. And he wrote this play called The Minutes, which was done last year at Steppenwolf, about a year ago right now, and went very well, I guess. And so they're doing the production in New York, and the part I'm playing was played there by an actor who got another New York offer, as I understand it, that he wanted to do more than this. So they came to me to do this. But I don't think either of these 2 Broadway jobs, Choir Boy or The Minutes, would have happened without my Steppenwolf connection.
So when does that play go into production?
We rehearse it, oddly enough, in Chicago, although all the performances are in New York. I guess somebody in it is involved in Chicago and needs to. But anyway, we rehearse in Chicago beginning in 2.5 weeks, or a little over 2 weeks. And then we begin previews February 25th in New York. We officially open in New York March 15th. All this is fairly brief, both rehearsal periods and preview period, but I think a lot of that has to do with it. Some part of the cast played it in Chicago. I don't exactly know who did and didn't.
Are you reconvening with some people that you know from?
Yeah, there are a lot of people in it I know. Well, yeah, some who I've really worked with at Steppenwolf, a couple who I've worked with in New York, but who are not members of Steppenwolf. But almost everybody in it is someone I've at least met and most of them are people I've gotten to know.
Because the acting world, I mean, in the production world, like you think when you get into it, you think it's like, oh my God, but it's relatively small. It seems to me to be a tight knit.
Well, it's small or big or tight knit or loose knit, depending on what show you're in.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've been in shows with nobody I've ever met. I've seen them sometimes, but so it's production by production. Here, this happens to be one where I think I know just about everybody. A couple of people very casually, but everybody else I've gone out for drinks with, or I've acted with, or I've directed.
And what's the name of that play?
It's called The Minutes.
The Minutes, and that'll be in New York, March 15th?
Well, the first preview is on February 25th.
Okay.
And then it's supposed to run till June 14th. But it's a commercial run, so maybe it won't run until June 14th. You don't ever know with these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking about going out for drinks and dinner, we first off, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And talking with us. It's been a great and informative episode. You and I are very similar, and we can talk at great length, continually. So hopefully we can continue this like a part 2 the next time you're in town.
My pleasure.
Because there's a ton of information that I know actors would be able to glean from you, and you're a wealth of information. And just, I want to say this like publicly too, like just a salt of the earth, awesome human being. So
thank you.
I appreciate you and your friendship. We got to get over to the restaurant.
Yes.
Where we have some TNT Trumbull New Theater, not TNT Dynamite.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
You got some TNT people waiting for you. So, Austin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Be on the lookout for the Minutes in New York, and go back and check out My Cousin Vinny and Beautiful Mind and so many other great shows.
Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Bridge.
Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. And The Mirror Has Two Faces. I forgot that you were in that till you just said
It's a small part.
Yeah.
It's an important little part.
There are no small parts, isn't that?
Yes, there are.
You're the best, man. Thank you. I appreciate you doing this.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And that's the show today, folks. We are really happy that you came aboard back with us again for Season 2, Episode 1. We're so thankful for Austin Pendelton to come and spend time with us. He's such a great guy. We're hoping to have him on again, maybe in the future, after the COVID-19 sheltering thing is over with. And listen, take this stuff seriously. I know that there's a lot of different information out there and people have their own personal feelings or whatever, but you know, sometimes you take precautions in life so that you don't repeat mistakes. I know that there's been people out there, you know, kind of politicizing this and saying, well, it's not as bad as this, or it's not as bad as the flu, or it's not as bad. Listen, the experts are the experts. None of us, unless people who are listening, are epidemiologists or disease, experts. Most of us are not. So leave it to the experts. Let's let the experts handle the COVID-19 and this coronavirus. And I'm praying for everybody out there. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I really hope that you are taking your precautions and you're staying safe and you're staying away from those who are the most at risk, those who have that are immunocompromised or are elderly. Please take them into consideration. It's not always about you. It's not always about, if you're strong and healthy and you're young, you think you're invincible. I was, in my 20s once too, and I felt the same way. But this is really so minuscule of a thing to ask. Now, I know the economy is struggling and people are having a hard time, et cetera, but we're going to get through this. We're all going to get through it together, and hopefully we come out on the other side. I'm looking for the silver linings in my life. Spending extra time with my wife and my son, kind of figuring out, again, kind of recalibrating and figuring out what's important. So what's important to me is the listeners out there. I hope you guys had a great time listening to the show. We've got episode 2 coming up. We'll be releasing that next week. Until then, I want to thank everyone here at Two Ticks and the Dog Productions. I want to thank my main man, Brandon Giovanni, who wasn't able to make it here today from MDI Studios. And of course, I want to tell everybody, if you want to feel better, you want to feel dialed in, and you want to get a little bit extra energy and a little bit extra focus and reduce your oxidative stress, which, by the way, will boost your immunity, I want you to visit biohacktomorrow.com, okay, or message me, and I'll walk you through the steps into some great products, into some great activators that can help you optimize your health. Until the next time, prodders, keep on prodding. And until the next time we get electrified together, be kind, love each other, and we'll talk to you again real soon. Take care.